Perhaps you have seen, in some eyes, the rather strange Swedish Lucia celebration that is going on in Sweden the 13th December every year. People dressing up in white dresses with red belts and a green wreath on their heads, candles in their hands. One of them will wear a crown with candles. The kids' version very often have glitter instead of the green wreath, and sometimes you also see tomtar, this little guy, and people in cone-shaped hats called Sankt Staffan and gingerbread men. They walk in singing special Lucia songs and offer you tasty things like saffron buns and gingerbread, and this happens usually very early in the mornings. It is a beautiful tradition, and the stories about where it comes from are as many as the variation of notes sung in a choir of school kids. Normal things people fight about are things like the Lucia should be blonde, it should be a woman, and we like to think that this is an old tradition with pagan roots. But is it really so? Well, let's explain. So, the name for this celebration, Lucia, comes from the Syracuse saint Sancta Lucia that was killed around the 4th century, the 13th day of December. It is a horrible story of abuse and torture of this poor woman that refused to marry a man that was not of the Christian faith. Thus she got tortured and sentenced to become a prostitute at a brothel. When she was supposed to be shipped off to the brothel, they didn't manage to move her, not even with oxes pulling her wagon. And they tried to pour oil on her, setting her on fire, and they stuck a sword in her neck. This martyr is still celebrated in Italy and Sicily, but the way she is celebrated has very little to do with the Sancta Lucia celebration in Sweden. In Italy and Sicily, she is more of a Santa Claus figure, sometimes even thought to come down the chimney and leave presents for kids. So why does Sweden and the rest of the Scandinavian countries celebrate a Catholic saint from the 4th century that has nothing to do with Scandinavia? The answer is, well, this is a long and complex tradition that had merged from very many different traditions, religions, and eras. Actually, the way we celebrate today didn't become the normal and common way of celebration until actually as late as 1950. You mean there is no pagan roots to this? Well, no, and yes. Again, it's complicated. Before we get Christianized up here, we had Yule celebration, and it's all centered around winter solstice. This celebration, we do not know that much about it, as with a lot of pre-Christian traditions, but it seemed to have had something to do with Odin, since one of the names Odin had was Yulnar or Yule. And this is still the word used for this holiday up here in Scandinavia. Yule in Sweden, Norway and Denmark, Yule in Iceland, and Jolo in Finnish. That is used instead of the English word Christmas, which is actually a word that means Christ Mass. There was also the expression to drink Yule, that hinted that eating was perhaps not the most important in this celebration. And still today, in Scandinavian Yule traditions, the different drinks, julmust, julmumma, glögg, julsnaps, etc., has an important part of our celebrations. What we do know is that there was a big celebration that seemed to have started around the 13th December. That was the day when the night was the longest, according to the old calendar. That meant there was a lot of evil spirits and magic going on during this night. It was also believed that animals could start talking during this night. So you needed to stay protected and you needed to ward off the magic with lights and by offerings and rituals. It was very common to stay up all night keeping the fire going on to protect yourself and your house. And we also know that the Christian church didn't actually get us to stop doing this, and as in many other situations, what the church couldn't stop people from doing, they tried to at least change into some kind of Christian tradition instead. Sometimes that meant more or less bending in the tradition under the church with a mental crowbar. because to gorge yourself on pork meat, drink until you pass out, and put out porridge for your tomte, the house spirit, really has nothing to do with the birth of baby Jesus. There are also ideas that we might have celebrated some kind of light goddess, perhaps Freya, around this time, and that she is the origin of the Lucia tradition. That is probably not so. We don't know exactly, but there are no clear evidence of this. We do have a lot of strange things that could connect to the old pre-Christian ways. There is this goat that shows up all around our Christmas decoration that could have something to do with Thor, that was known for having a chariot drawn by goats. And we do eat bread shaped into sun crosses, and we call them lussekatter, Lucia cats. And we do know that Freya had a chariot drawn by cats. And we eat a lot of pork, ham and ribs and sausage, and we know that in Valhalla they had a pig Särimner, and also the god Frey, the fertility and farmer god, had a pig called Gyllenborst. This seems to give us proof that the old pagan roots actually still exist. But we also know that we have borrowed a lot of things from Germany, like the Christmas tree, for example, which, by the way, is not Yggdrasil, just as Odin is not the origin of Santa Claus. The goat could be Thor's goats, yes, but it can also be a remnant from St. Nicolaus tradition, where St. Nick walked around with a goat on a leash, a symbol of him defeating the devil. And the saffron buns we eat seems to come from Germany too. In Germany, there is a sweet Christmas bread that is called Duvekater, and that was exported to Scandinavia during the 17th century. For Swedes, this sounds a lot like Duvelkatter, and that means devil's cats. So when they started to become a stack product for 13th December and Lucia, we started to call them lussekatter, Lucia cats. But this has probably nothing to do with neither the devil, nor cats, nor Freya. It's just a German word that no one could pronounce correctly. Also, the saffron doesn't seem to be used in these baking products until the 19th century. But this is not a cooking channel, so I will leave that one for now. So, where does Lucia fit in on all these strange, maybe pagan, maybe Christian traditions? We actually have no records of her being celebrated before as late as 1764. Before that, we have sources that speak about boys during the medieval times to go around dressed up as different characters from the Bible, going from door to door, singing and begging for food and drinks. They bought lights with them, of course, because anyone trying to go outside in Scandinavia before 9 in the morning knows that it is pitch black outside. You will trip. So these lads carried torches and lanterns with them to see. But if you ask an ethnologist, it probably has some kind of symbolic meaning about breaking the darkness and going towards lighter and brighter days again. This changed a bit during the 17th century to become more and more just the three wise men or kings that is said to have visited Joseph and Mary and brought gifts to baby Jesus. And there might have been one or two angels dressed in white following them. It was still going around singing and begging for food and drinks. And since these young lads, as students in all times, wasn't the ones to spit in the glass, as we say here in Sweden, the nice singing might have turned more or less into rather loud bawling and party noise. Between 18th and 19th century, the male students at the universities, because, well, there were no females allowed at the universities at this time, started to dress up in female white clothes, and they continued to party, singing and going around entertaining people around the countryside. Some people might not have been so entertained though. Imagine yourself being woken up in an early morning by a bunch of drunken and noisy cross-dressing students. This was, of course, something that the priest didn't like, and in the western part of Sweden they tried to calm down the party screams and cross-dressing drunken lads, introducing a more calmer and Christian and proper way of celebrating this day. This is when we start to see our modern ways of celebrating Lucia. The angels and the singing got a more important role, and instead of begging for stuff, the people offered nice and festive breakfasts. 1764, as I said, is the first time we see a white-dressed female Lucia character appearing. She had wings, and she went around to rich people, waking them up and serving them breakfast, which might have been that saffron bread we eat today, but perhaps without saffron. Around 1820 is the first reference of a female with candles in her hair, and 1884 is the first drawing or painting of Lucia with candles in her hair and a white dress. That picture is also from a place in the western part of Sweden. 1892, Skansen, the first outdoor museum in Sweden, wanted to show off different types of Christmas traditions. And before that, most people in Sweden had only seen the loud partying students, never a female dressed in white, with candles in her hair. It quickly became a tradition in other parts of Sweden, though. Probably because this was a good way of not being woken up by a bunch of drunk, loud students in the morning, but instead a beautiful, calm, singing woman with candles and breakfast. Around 1920, the Lucia tradition had spread to most parts of our country and also spread to Norway and Denmark. In Denmark, they actually started to celebrate Lucia as a silent protest against the Nazis during World War II. During 1950, it has settled to become what we see today as the traditional way of doing it, with a white-dressed woman with candles in her hair, followed by white-dressed other females and boys in their cone-shaped hats, gingerbread men, and a sort of twisted combination of Santa Claus and the old folklore tomte. Everybody singing Christmas carols, Lucia songs, and giving us saffron buns, coffee, and glögg. Since around 1990, it has been a war every year about whether or not the Lucia should be dark-haired or blonde, if it's okay to have gingerbread men in the group, or if this is racists and a form of blackface, and if it really is allowed to have another gender of the Lucia than a female. Well, I say, it all depends on what tradition you want to follow and from what era. If you want a female Lucia, yes, go away, have that. Then you are doing it the modern way from 19th century and forward. If you want a dark-haired Lucia, sure, then you are probably more close to the actual saint that was from Syracuse. And if you want to have a gender-bending Lucia, go for it. The Lucia tradition of men dressing up in white dresses is far more older than the blonde female, so then you are doing it the really medieval and Renaissance traditional way. And if you prefer to believe that this is a pagan and heathen tradition, well, the idea of Lucia was from the start a protection against evil and magic during the midwinter solstice. So don't let me tell you that you can't celebrate this as a pagan holiday. To sum it up, do whatever you like and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Happy holidays!